The desert sun beat down hard on Thomas as he guided his horse through the narrow canyon. Sweat dripped down his back, soaking through his worn shirt. He'd been riding since dawn, carrying supplies to the remote settlements scattered across the Arizona territory. It was 1877, and out here, civilization was just a word people used back east. Thomas was 28 years old, tall and lean from years of outdoor work. His face was weathered and tanned, marked by a scar above his left eyebrow from a war he'd rather forget. He'd fought for the Union, survived battles that still haunted his sleep, and when it was all over, he couldn't bear to return to the crowded cities. So he'd stayed west, becoming a scout and trader, a man who moved between worlds but belonged to neither. The canyon walls rose steep on both sides, casting long shadows across the rocky path. Thomas knew these trails well enough, but he never let his guard down. Out here, danger could come from anywhere. Outlaws, hostile raiders, wild animals, or just the land itself. He kept his rifle across his lap, his eyes constantly scanning the rocks above. That's when he heard it. A woman's scream, sharp and desperate, echoing off the canyon walls. Thomas pulled his horse to a stop, listening hard. Another scream, followed by rough male laughter and angry shouting. His jaw tightened. Every instinct told him to keep riding, to mind his own business. Getting involved in other people's troubles was a good way to end up dead out here. But something in that woman's voice, the pure terror in it, wouldn't let him turn away. He dismounted quietly, tying his horse behind a cluster of rocks. Moving carefully, he made his way toward the sounds, using the canyon's natural cover. As he got closer, he could hear voices more clearly now. 3 men speaking in rough English, their words crude and threatening. Thomas crept up behind a large boulder and peered around it. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 men dressed in dirty trail clothes and armed with pistols had cornered an Apache woman against the canyon wall. She was older, maybe in her 40s, with gray streaking through her long black hair. Her dress was traditional Apache, made of tanned hide and decorated with intricate beadwork. Around her neck hung beautiful turquoise jewelry, and a woven basket lay overturned nearby, its contents of herbs and plants scattered across the ground. One of the men grabbed at her necklace while another held her arms. The third man, the biggest of them, laughed as she struggled and spat defiance in Apache. Even cornered and outnumbered, she fought like a wildcat. "Hold her still," the big man growled. "That turquoise is worth good money." "Maybe we should take more than just her jewelry," another one said with an ugly grin. The woman understood enough English to know what he meant. She kicked hard, catching one man in the shin. He yelped and backhanded her across the face. She fell to her knees, blood trickling from her lip. Thomas had seen enough. His hands moved on their own, raising his rifle to his shoulder. His voice came out steady and cold. "Step away from her now." All 3 men spun around, reaching for their weapons. Thomas fired a warning shot that kicked up dust at their feet. "Next one goes through somebody. Your choice." The big man's hand hovered over his pistol. "This ain't your business, friend." "Just a savage woman. Nobody's gonna care." "I care," Thomas said simply, "and I'm the one with the rifle aimed at you. So I'd say it's very much my business." For a long moment, nobody moved. The air felt thick with tension. Thomas kept his rifle steady, his finger on the trigger. He'd learned in the war that the man who hesitated was the man who died. These outlaws could see in his eyes that he wouldn't hesitate. The second man, younger and less stupid than his friends, spoke up nervously. "Come on, Jake, ain't worth dying over some jewelry." But Jake, the big man, wasn't ready to back down. His pride wouldn't let him. "You gonna shoot all 3 of us before we get you?" "Probably not," Thomas admitted. "But I'll definitely get you first. And judging by that belly, you'll die slow and painful. Your friends might get me, but you'll be bleeding out in the dirt watching it happen. That the legacy you want?" Jake's face went red with anger, but Thomas saw the fear creeping into his eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake spat in the dirt. "This ain't over." "Yeah, it is," Thomas said firmly. "Now move, all of you. Leave the jewelry and go." The younger outlaw was already backing away. After another tense moment, Jake and the third man followed. But as they walked past Thomas, Jake leaned in close. "You just made a big mistake, friend." "We don't forget." "Neither do I," Thomas replied quietly. "Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you walk away." The 3 men mounted their horses and rode off, but Thomas noticed they headed up the canyon instead of back the way they'd come. That bothered him. Men like that didn't just give up and disappear. They'd be back, probably when he wasn't expecting it. He turned his attention to the Apache woman. She'd pulled herself up to sitting, her back against the rock wall. Her face was swelling where she'd been hit, and he could see she was favoring her right leg. Blood seeped through a tear in her dress just above her knee. Thomas approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. She watched him with dark, intelligent eyes full of pain and suspicion. He couldn't blame her for not trusting him. White men had given her people plenty of reasons not to trust. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, knowing she probably didn't understand all his words but hoping his tone would carry the meaning. He pointed to his canteen, then to her. "Water?" She hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Thomas moved closer carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. He uncorked his canteen and handed it to her. She took it and drank deeply, never taking her eyes off him. Thomas knelt a few feet away and slowly opened his saddlebag, pulling out a clean cloth and some basic medical supplies. He'd learned to carry such things. Out here, the nearest doctor might be days away. He gestured to her wounded leg. "I need to look at that. Stop the bleeding." The woman studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his soul. Then she spoke in Apache, words he didn't understand but could guess at. She pulled up the torn section of her dress, revealing a deep gash across her thigh. It needed stitching, but Thomas didn't think she'd let him get that close with a needle. He soaked the cloth in water and carefully cleaned around the wound. She flinched but didn't cry out. Up close, he could see the strength in her face, the lines that spoke of a hard life and harder losses. This was a woman who'd survived things that would have broken softer people. As he worked, Thomas wrapped the wound tightly with strips of cloth, doing his best to stop the bleeding. The woman watched his hands, noting how gentle he was, how careful. When he finished, she spoke again in Apache, then tried English. "Name Nalan," Thomas nodded. "I'm Thomas." He touched his chest. "Thomas. Thomas," she repeated carefully. Then she touched her own chest. "Nalan." The sun was dropping toward the horizon now, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. Thomas knew they couldn't stay here. Those outlaws might come back, and even if they didn't, the desert night was dangerous for a wounded woman. He gathered up Nalan's scattered herbs, placing them carefully back in her basket. She made a small sound of approval. These plants were clearly important to her, gathered for a specific purpose. Thomas offered his hand to help her stand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. When she tried to put weight on her injured leg, she gasped and nearly fell. Thomas caught her, supporting her weight. There was no way she could walk far like this. He looked at his horse, then back at her, and made a decision. Using gestures and simple words, he made her understand he wanted to help her get home. Nalan shook her head vigorously at first, speaking rapidly in Apache. Thomas caught the word for danger in there somewhere. "I know it's dangerous," he said quietly. "But you can't stay here. Those men might come back, and that leg needs better care than I can give it." Something in his eyes must have convinced her, or maybe she just recognized she had no better options. Slowly she nodded. Getting her onto the horse was awkward and painful for her, but she bore it with gritted teeth. Thomas handed her the basket of herbs, then took the reins and started walking, leading the horse carefully through the canyon. He kept his rifle in his free hand, his eyes scanning constantly for threats. As they traveled, Thomas's mind raced with questions. Who was Nalan? Where was her family? And what was he going to do when they got there? Walking into an Apache camp as a white man was risky at best, suicidal at worst. Relations between the Apache and white settlers had been bloody for years. But he'd made his choice back in that canyon. He couldn't leave her wounded and alone. Night fell fast in the desert. Thomas made camp in a sheltered spot between two large rocks, building a small fire that wouldn't be visible from a distance. He shared his dried meat and hardtack with Nalan, who ate sparingly. She kept watching him as if trying to figure out what kind of man he was. Thomas laid out his bedroll and gestured for her to take it. She refused at first, but he insisted, miming that he'd sleep sitting up against the rock. Finally she accepted, wrapping herself in his blanket. Before she closed her eyes, Nalan spoke in broken English. "Why you help?" Thomas thought about that for a long moment. Why had he helped? It would have been safer to ride on, to pretend he'd heard nothing. But he'd learned in the war that the kind of man who could ignore a... Dawn came cold and gray to the desert. Thomas woke with a stiff neck from sleeping against the rock, his rifle still across his lap. The fire had burned down to ashes. He looked over to check on Nalin and found her already awake, sitting up and examining her wounded leg with a critical eye. She glanced at him and gave a small nod, as if to say she'd live. Then she pointed toward the east and spoke in Apache, adding a few English words. "My people. Half day." She held up her hand, fingers spread, then closed it and opened it again. Thomas understood. About 10 miles, maybe less. He helped her back onto the horse, noting how she tried to hide the pain. This woman had pride, the kind that wouldn't bend easily. They set off as the sun rose, turning the desert from gray to gold. The landscape changed as they traveled. The canyon opened into wider valleys dotted with scrub brush and twisted juniper trees. Thomas kept them moving at a steady pace, but his eyes never stopped scanning. Those 3 outlaws from yesterday kept nagging at his mind. Men like that didn't let go of grudges. Around mid-morning, Nalin suddenly tensed on the horse. She said something sharp in Apache and pointed behind them. Thomas turned and felt his stomach drop. 2 riders were following them, staying just far enough back to be hard to identify. But Thomas knew. He'd been doing this long enough to recognize trouble when it stalked him. "The men from yesterday," he said grimly. "The third one was probably somewhere else, maybe circling around. These weren't amateurs. They'd tracked him through the night and waited for the right moment." Thomas scanned the terrain ahead. Open ground offered no cover, but to the right a jumble of red rocks rose up like broken teeth. Not ideal, but better than nothing. He urged the horse toward them, moving faster now. The riders behind them picked up speed too. They knew they'd been spotted and didn't care anymore. Thomas could hear them whooping and hollering, trying to spook him into making a mistake. They reached the rocks just as the first shot rang out. The bullet pinged off stone somewhere to Thomas's left. He slid off the horse and helped Nalin down, practically carrying her behind a large boulder. His horse, well trained from years on the trail, moved deeper into the rocks without being told. "Stay down," Thomas told Nalin, though she probably understood that without the words. He checked his rifle, made sure he had extra ammunition within reach, and peered around the boulder. The 2 riders had stopped about 100 yards out, using their own horses as cover. Thomas recognized the big man, Jake, and the younger outlaw from yesterday. They were shouting something, but Thomas couldn't make out the words over the wind. Then Jake's voice carried clearly. "Just give us the squaw and her jewelry." "You can ride away." Thomas didn't bother answering. Men like that didn't keep their word. Even if he gave them what they wanted, they'd shoot him in the back the second he turned around. Besides, he'd already made his choice yesterday. He wasn't changing it now. He aimed carefully and fired, not trying to hit them, but to keep them pinned down. The shot made their horses dance nervously. Good. Nervous horses meant nervous riders. For the next few minutes, it was a standoff. They'd fire, he'd fire back, and nobody was hitting anything. But Thomas knew time wasn't on his side. They had him trapped, and eventually the third man would show up. 3 against 1 in open ground was math Thomas didn't like. That's when Nalin surprised him. She'd been quiet, watching everything with those sharp eyes. Now she touched his arm and pointed up. Thomas followed her gesture and saw what she meant. The rocks they were hiding in formed a natural maze, with passages and gaps that wound upward. She was gesturing, explaining something in Apache mixed with hand signs. Thomas understood. She knew these rocks probably traveled through here many times. She was offering to guide them through to escape rather than fight. But there was a problem. "You can't climb with that leg," he said, shaking his head. Nalin's expression turned fierce. She said something in Apache that sounded like cursing, then grabbed a fallen branch and used it as a crutch, demonstrating how she could move. The woman was tough as leather. Thomas made a quick decision. They couldn't win a gunfight here, but maybe they could disappear into the rocks. He fired 3 quick shots to keep the outlaws' heads down, then helped Nalin up. She led the way, moving surprisingly fast despite her injury, using the branch and the rocks for support. The maze of stone was tighter than Thomas expected. They squeezed through narrow gaps, climbed over fallen boulders, and wound through passages that barely let sunlight through. Behind them, Thomas could hear the outlaws shouting to each other, trying to figure out where their prey had gone. Nalin moved with confidence, never hesitating at splits in the path. She'd definitely been here before. Thomas followed, pulling his horse along, the animal's hooves clattering on stone. That noise would give them away, but there was no help for it. They emerged on the far side of the rock formation into a narrow ravine. Nolan pointed ahead urgently. Thomas could see why. About 50 yards up, the ravine curved sharply. If they could reach that bend, they'd be out of sight from anyone following. They'd almost made it when a shout came from behind. The younger outlaw had found their trail. Thomas heard boots scrambling on rock, moving fast. "Go," Thomas told Nolan, practically pushing her forward. "Get around that bend." He turned back, rifle ready, positioning himself behind a shoulder of rock. The young outlaw came around a boulder, pistol raised. He was maybe 20 years old, with scared eyes and hands that shook slightly. Not a killer by nature, just a kid who'd made bad choices. "Don't do this," Thomas called out. "You're young. You can still walk away." The kid's gun wavered. For a second, Thomas thought he might actually listen. Then Jake's voice boomed from somewhere behind. "Shoot him, Danny! Shoot him now!" The kid's face hardened. He fired, but fear made his aim wild. The bullet went high and right. Thomas didn't have a choice anymore. He aimed low and fired, catching the kid in the leg. Danny went down screaming, clutching his thigh. Thomas didn't wait to see more. He ran, catching up to Nolan just past the bend. Behind them, Jake was bellowing with rage, and Thomas heard him calling for the third man. They needed more distance, and they needed it fast. The ravine opened into a wider valley. Nolan pointed toward a line of trees in the distance, marking where water ran. They pushed toward it, Thomas supporting Nolan now, both of them exhausted. They reached the trees just as Thomas heard horses behind them. 2 riders this time, coming hard. Thomas's mind raced through options. They couldn't outrun horses. They couldn't hide in these sparse trees. All that was left was fighting, and he was down to maybe 10 rounds of ammunition. But Nolan wasn't done surprising him. She cupped her hands around her mouth and made a sound. A distinctive call that echoed across the valley. It sounded like a hawk's cry, but something about it was different, deliberate. She repeated it twice more. The riders were getting closer. Thomas could see them now, Jake and the third man. He raised his rifle, preparing for what might be his last fight. Then he heard it, answering calls from the trees ahead. And suddenly, Apache warriors seemed to materialize from nowhere. 3, 4, 5 of them, appearing like ghosts with drawn bows and rifles. The effect on Jake and his partner was instant. They yanked their horses to a stop so hard the animals nearly fell. For a moment, everyone froze. The Apache warriors, faces painted for war, stood in a line between Thomas and the outlaws. The message was clear. Jake's face went white. He was stupid, but not stupid enough to fight 5 Apache warriors. He and his partner wheeled their horses and rode hard in the opposite direction, not looking back. Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. He looked at Nolan, who was smiling despite her obvious pain. One of the warriors, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, approached. He spoke to Nolan in rapid Apache, his face concerned. She answered, pointing to her leg, then to Thomas. The warrior's eyes turned to Thomas, studying him with an intensity that made Thomas want to step back. Nolan spoke again, longer this time, gesturing to illustrate what had happened. Thomas caught a few words he recognized, but not enough to follow the story. When she finished, the scarred warrior looked at Thomas differently. Not friendly exactly, but no longer hostile. The warrior spoke in heavily accented English. "I am Cochilo. Nolan is my sister." He gestured to the other warriors. "You helped her. You fought for her." "This is good." Thomas nodded, not sure what to say. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him tired and slightly dizzy. Cochilo made a decision. He spoke to his men in Apache, and 2 of them moved to support Nolan. Another brought up horses. Cochilo looked at Thomas. "You come." "Not safe here. Those men come back with more." Thomas knew he was right. Jake wouldn't forget this. But riding into an Apache camp as a white man felt like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Still, what choice did he have? He'd already tied his fate to Nolan's when he pulled that trigger yesterday. "All right," Thomas said. "I'll come." As they mounted up and rode toward the Apache camp, Thomas wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd saved a woman from outlaws, seemed simple enough at the time. But nothing was ever simple out here in the territory. Simple things didn't involve life debts and warriors appearing from nowhere. The Apache camp sat in a hidden valley that Thomas never would have found on his own. Cottonwood trees clustered around a small stream, and traditional dwellings called wickiups dotted the area, their frames covered with brush and hides. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children who'd been playing stopped to stare as the group rode in. Thomas felt every eye on him. Some looks were curious, others suspicious, and a few outright hostile. He sat straight in the saddle, trying to appear calm while his heart hammered in his chest. One wrong move here could end badly. Cochillo led them to the center of camp, where older men and women gathered. The warriors who'd helped rescue them spread out, and Thomas noticed they positioned themselves between him and potential threats. Whether they were protecting him or guarding him, he wasn't quite sure. An older man stepped forward, his face deeply lined and his hair completely gray. He wore a shirt decorated with intricate beadwork and carried himself with obvious authority. This was clearly the band's leader, someone whose word carried weight. Cochillo dismounted and spoke to the elder in Apache, explaining what had happened. Nalin added her own account, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Thomas caught his name several times and words that sounded important even if he didn't understand them. The elder listened carefully, his dark eyes moving between Nalin, Cochillo, and Thomas. When they finished, he spoke directly to Thomas in surprisingly good English. "I am Delgado. I lead these people." He gestured around the camp. "My daughter tells me you saved her life. My son tells me you fought beside her against your own kind. Why?" Thomas had known this question would come. He chose his words carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do. Those men were wrong. She needed help." "Many white men would not help," Delgado said. "Many would join those outlaws or turn away." "I'm not those men," Thomas replied simply. Delgado studied him for a long moment, then said something in Apache. The tension in the camp eased slightly. People began moving again, though many still watched Thomas. "You may stay," Delgado said. "We will feed you and you can rest. Tomorrow we talk more about this debt my daughter owes you." Thomas was led to a wickiup on the edge of camp. It was small but sturdy, with a fire ring outside and sleeping furs inside. A young warrior was assigned to stay nearby, ostensibly to help if Thomas needed anything, but also clearly to keep watch on him. As evening fell, someone brought Thomas food, a bowl of stew made with rabbit and corn. It was simple but good, and he realized he hadn't eaten since morning. While he ate, people passed by stealing glances at him. Some children crept closer, whispering and giggling until their mothers called them back. A young man approached, maybe 18 or 19, with an easier manner than most of the others. "I am Kuruk," he said in clear English. "Nalin's nephew. I learned English at mission school before I ran away." He grinned. The priests were very unhappy. Thomas couldn't help but smile back. "I'm Thomas, I know. Everyone knows. You're all they talk about." Kuruk sat down cross-legged near the fire. "Nalin is important here. She's a medicine woman, knows all the healing plants and sacred ceremonies. When you saved her, you did something big." "I just did what anyone should do," Thomas said. "But most don't," Kuruk replied. "That's why it matters." He paused. "Also, you helped her fight. You didn't run. That matters too." Apache respect courage. They talked for a while, Kuruk explaining camp customs and translating when people called out greetings or questions. Thomas learned that this band had been living free in these mountains for years, avoiding the reservation by staying mobile and hidden. They survived by hunting, gathering, and occasional trading with friendly Mexican villages across the border. "It gets harder every year," Kuruk admitted. "More soldiers, more settlers. The free life is ending." He looked sad. "But we hold on as long as we can." The next morning, Thomas was invited to Nalin's family dwelling. It was larger than his guest wickiup, with a cooking area outside where several women worked. Nalin sat on a blanket, her wounded leg stretched out. A young woman was changing the bandage, applying a paste made from herbs that smelled sharp and medicinal. Cochillo was there, along with a younger warrior who shared Nalin's strong features. This was Dasan, Nalin's son, Thomas learned. Dasan watched Thomas with wary eyes, one hand resting on the knife at his belt. But it was the young woman treating Nalin's leg who caught Thomas's attention. She was maybe 20 years old, with long black hair braided down her back and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a traditional Apache dress decorated with tiny shells that clicked softly when she moved. Her hands worked with confidence and skill, gentle but sure. She glanced up at Thomas and their eyes met for just a second. Something passed between them, quick as lightning but just as striking. Then she looked back down at her work. but Thomas saw the faintest smile touch her lips. "This is Kimi, my daughter," Nalan said in halting English. "She helps me with medicine." "Very good with healing," Kimi spoke in Apache without looking up. Kuruk, who'd followed Thomas, translated. "She says her mother's leg will heal well. The white man's bandage was good, stopped the bleeding." Thomas nodded. "I'm glad." After Kimi finished, she brought food. Corn cakes, honey, and dried berries. She placed a bowl in front of Thomas and said something soft in Apache. Her voice was like music. "She welcomes you to our fire," Kuruk translated. "She says any friend of her mother is honored here." The family ate together, and despite the language barrier, it felt almost comfortable. Nalan and Cochilo seemed at ease with him now, and even Dasan's hostility had cooled to mere caution. But it was Kimi that Thomas found his eyes returning to. She moved with grace, spoke rarely but with weight when she did, and treated everyone with the same quiet respect. And she was beautiful. Not in the delicate way of the women back east, but with a strength and vitality that suited this hard land. After the meal, Nalan spoke seriously in Apache. Kuruk translated, his voice formal now. "My aunt says you have given her back her life. This is the greatest debt. Among our people, such debts must be honored properly. She asks what you would take in payment. Horses, furs, sacred objects?" Thomas felt uncomfortable. "I don't want payment. I helped because it was right," Kuruk translated, and Nalan responded firmly. "She says this is good, that your heart is true. But the debt remains. It must be honored or the balance is broken." Thomas didn't know what to say to that. The Apache had different ideas about such things, and he was out of his depth. "I don't know what's appropriate," he admitted. Nalan and Cochillo exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then Nalan spoke again, longer this time, her voice taking on a ceremonial tone. Kuruk's eyes widened as he listened. He looked at Thomas, then at Kimi, who'd gone very still. "She says..." He paused as if unsure how to translate. "She says the greatest honor she can give is to unite your families. She offers her daughter Kimi as your wife." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He stared at Nalan, then at Kimi. The young woman's face showed nothing, but her hands had tightened on the bowl she held. I can't," Thomas stammered. "That's not... I mean..." Kuruk held up a hand. "Let me explain. In our way, this is the highest honor. She doesn't offer Kimi like property. She offers to bind your families together, to make you one of us. It means trust. It means she sees you as worthy." Thomas's mind raced. This was insane. He barely knew these people. He couldn't just marry a woman he'd spoken maybe 5 words to. It went against everything he understood about marriage and choice, and yet, looking at Kimi, he found himself not immediately refusing. There was something about her, something that pulled at him. But this was her mother's choice, not hers. That stuck in Thomas's throat. He'd seen too many women back east trapped in marriages they didn't want, treated like property to be traded. He wouldn't do that, no matter how much he might want to accept. "I'm honored," Thomas said carefully. "Truly, but I can't accept. I won't take a wife who has no say in the matter. Where I come from, marriage is a choice both people make." Kuruk translated, and Nalan looked confused. Cochillo frowned. They talked among themselves in rapid Apache. Finally, Kuruk turned back to Thomas. "They don't understand. Among our people, parents arrange marriages. It's normal. It's how it's done." "Not where I'm from," Thomas said firmly. "A woman should choose her own husband." There was a moment of tense silence. Then Kimi spoke for the first time since the offer was made. Her voice was clear and strong, speaking in Apache directly to her mother. Nalan looked surprised. Cochillo leaned forward, listening intently. Dasan scowled. Kimi spoke for maybe a minute, gesturing occasionally toward Thomas. When she finished, Nalan looked at her daughter with something like pride mixed with surprise. "What did she say?" Thomas asked. Kuruk grinned. "She said she's been watching you since you arrived. She says you're careful with your strength, gentle with her mother's wound. She says you speak respectfully even to children. She says you look at women like people, not property." He paused. "She says her mother chooses wisely, but she agrees with you. She wants to choose for herself." Thomas's heart was beating fast. "And? She says you should stay. Come to camp regularly for trading. She will learn your language, you will learn ours. You will spend time together, properly watched by..." The Apache wedding ceremony was more beautiful than Thomas could have imagined. It took place at dawn, when the world was caught between darkness and light, a symbolic time for new beginnings. The entire band gathered in a circle. In the center, Kimmy stood in a traditional dress that Nalin had spent weeks preparing. It was made of the softest deerskin, decorated with hundreds of tiny shells, turquoise stones, and intricate beadwork and patterns that told stories of Kimmy's family line. Her hair hung long and loose, adorned with feathers and flowers. Thomas wore his best clothes, cleaned and mended with a new shirt that Nalin had gifted him. It was decorated in the Apache style, a blend of his world and theirs. Delgado performed the ceremony, his voice strong and resonant as he spoke in Apache. Kuruk stood nearby, quietly translating for Thomas. The elder spoke of two paths becoming one, of strength found in unity, of the sacred responsibility of caring for another's heart. A blanket was brought forward, woven by Kimmy's grandmother long ago. It was blue and white, with symbols representing protection and prosperity. Delgado wrapped it around both Thomas and Kimmy's shoulders, binding them together. "You are now one person before the spirits," Kuruk translated. "What happens to one happens to both. You share joy and sorrow, success and struggle, life and death." Kimmy and Thomas turned to face each other. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. He looked down at her, feeling like his heart might burst from his chest. They each took turns speaking their promises. Kimmy spoke first in Apache, then carefully in English. "I promise to stand with you, to heal your wounds and share your burdens, to speak truth even when it's hard, to honor your spirit and respect your path." Thomas spoke his own promises, simple but heartfelt. "I promise to protect you but never cage you, to listen to your wisdom and value your strength, to build a life with you, whatever that means, to love you until my last breath." A basket was brought forward filled with corn and fruits representing abundance. They shared food from the basket, each feeding the other, symbolizing their commitment to provide for one another. Then Kimmy's family came forward one by one to offer blessings. Nalin placed her hands on both their heads and spoke words that made her voice crack with emotion. Cochilo presented Thomas with a knife, a warrior's gift that signified acceptance into the family. Even Dasan, though his smile was tight, placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder in acknowledgement. As the sun fully rose, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the ceremony concluded. The band erupted in celebration. There was music, drums and flutes and voices raised in traditional songs. There was dancing and feasting that would last all day. Thomas and Kimmy sat together on a blanket, receiving congratulations. Young girls brought them gifts, handmade items and tokens of good luck. Warriors toasted them with ceremonial drinks. Children ran around their feet laughing and playing. "Are you happy?" Kimmy asked him quietly in the midst of the celebration. "More than I've ever been," Thomas answered honestly. She smiled and rested her head briefly on his shoulder. In their culture, public displays of affection were modest, but this small gesture spoke volumes. But Thomas knew this Apache ceremony wasn't enough. Not for the world outside this camp. The U.S. government wouldn't recognize it. If anything happened to him, Kimmy would have no legal protection. If they were ever separated, she'd have no claim to him in the eyes of white law. He'd already explained this to Kimmy and her family, with Kuruk's help. It had taken time to make them understand how the white world worked, how paper and official words mattered more than sacred ceremonies and witnessed promises. Kimmy had been confused and a bit offended at first. "We are married," she'd said firmly. "The spirits know it. Our people witnessed it. What more is needed?" "The white man's law doesn't care about spirit marriages," Thomas had explained gently. "If we want to live safely in the territory, we need both." After much discussion, she'd agreed. So 3 days after the Apache ceremony, Thomas and Kimmy rode to the nearest settlement that had a traveling preacher. The town was called Copper Creek, barely 20 buildings scattered along a dusty main road. Thomas felt Kimmy tense beside him as they rode in. People stopped to stare. A white man with an Apache woman wasn't unusual, but a white man clearly treating an Apache woman as his equal. That drew attention. They found the preacher in a small church that was really just a converted storefront. Reverend Walsh was an older man with kind eyes but a nervous manner. When Thomas explained what they wanted, Walsh's face showed his conflict. "You want me to marry you to an Apache woman?" he said slowly. "We're already married in her tradition," Thomas said firmly. "We need it recognized by the law." "It's legal," Walsh said. But son, are you sure about this? Life will be hard for you both. People won't accept it. I'm sure, Thomas said. And it's not really your concern whether people accept it or not. I just need you to perform the ceremony and sign the papers. The Reverend looked at Kimmy, who stood straight and proud despite the hostile stares from people passing by outside. Can she speak English? Does she understand what she's agreeing to? I speak English, Kimmy said clearly. I understand. I choose this. Walsh studied them both and sighed. All right, let me get my Bible. The Christian ceremony was brief and felt hollow after the richness of the Apache ritual. There was no community gathered, no celebration, no joy. Just Walsh reading from his Bible while Thomas and Kimmy repeated words that meant little to Kimmy. The worst part came when they had to step outside afterward. A crowd had gathered, drawn by gossip that spread fast in a small town. Their faces ranged from curious to disgusted. An older woman spat in the dirt near Kimmy's feet. Squaw, she hissed. Thomas moved to step between them, his anger flaring hot, but Kimmy's hand on his arm stopped him. She looked at the woman calmly, with dignity that made the other woman's hatred look small and petty. Let's go, Kimmy said quietly in English. As they rode out of town, Thomas could feel the weight of those stares. He'd known it would be hard, but experiencing the naked prejudice directed at his wife made his blood boil. That's how your people see mine, Kimmy said once they were clear of town. She didn't sound angry, just sad and tired. Now you understand why we stay away. Not all white people are like that, Thomas said, though the words felt hollow. Enough are, Kimmy replied. They rode back to camp in heavy silence. The joy of their Apache wedding felt tarnished now, contaminated by the hatred of the outside world. But when they arrived back at camp, Nalin was waiting with a smile. She'd prepared a special meal for them, and that evening under the stars, surrounded by people who loved them, some of the darkness lifted. Thomas had been invited to build a home within the camp, a high honor. He chose a spot near the stream where cottonwood trees provided shade. With help from Cochilo and other warriors, he constructed something unique, a dwelling that blended both traditions. The structure had Apache elements, the circular shape of a wickiup, the traditional entrance facing east toward the rising sun, but it also had elements from Thomas's world, a wooden floor raised off the ground, a stone fireplace for winter, glass windows he'd brought from the settlement. Kimmy loved it immediately. It's like us, she said, running her hand along the smooth wood walls. Two worlds becoming one, they set up their home together. Kimmy brought her medicine bags and tools, her weaving, her personal belongings. Thomas brought his few possessions, books, tools, supplies. They arranged everything carefully, creating a space that was truly theirs. Their first night alone together as husband and wife, Kimmy lit a fire in the traditional way, speaking quiet prayers as she did. Then she turned to Thomas with a shy smile that made his heart race. No more watching cousins, she said. No more Kuruk translating everything. Just us. Just us, Thomas agreed, pulling her close. That night they truly became one, and in the morning, wrapped in each other's arms, Thomas felt a peace he'd never known. This woman, this life, this blend of two worlds, it felt right in a way nothing ever had before. But peace in the Arizona Territory never lasted long. 2 weeks after their wedding, a rider came to camp in the middle of the night. He was from a neighboring Apache band and brought terrible news. Army troops were moving through the territory with orders to round up all free Apache. They were close, maybe 3 days away. The camp erupted into urgent discussion. Some wanted to flee deeper into the mountains. Others wanted to fight. A few suggested going to the reservation voluntarily before they were forced. Thomas sat with Kimmy and her family while Delgado and the other elders debated. The mood was grim. Everyone knew what was coming. What will you do? Thomas asked Cochilo quietly. We will not go willingly to that place, Cochilo said. The reservation is death, just slower than bullets. But we can't fight the whole army either, Nalin spoke up, her voice heavy. Some must go, to preserve the people, but not all of us need to walk the same path. All eyes turned to Thomas and Kimmy. Thomas realized what Nalin was suggesting. He'd mentioned his land, his idea of claiming Kimmy's family as his relatives. Now that option was becoming urgent, not theoretical. Thomas took a deep breath. I have about 100 acres legally claimed and registered. It's not reservation land, it's my property. I could claim that Kimmy's family are my legal relatives married into my family. The law might accept that. Thomas's homestead sat in a small valley with a creek running through it. The land wasn't much, rocky and stubborn, but it had water and some good soil. His cabin was small, just 2 rooms, built with his own hands 3 years ago, when he'd first claimed the land. He'd never imagined sharing it with a family. Now looking at it through Kimmy's eyes, he saw how rough it was. The roof leaked in places. The floor was uneven. The windows were small and let in drafts. It had been fine for a solitary man, but for a family, especially one that included Nalin and Kimmy's 2 young cousins, it was barely adequate. "We'll need to expand," Thomas said, feeling almost apologetic. "Build more rooms," but Kimmy smiled. "It's a good start. Strong bones. We'll add to it." Nalin examined the land with a critical eye, already planning where to plant traditional crops and gather medicinal herbs. The 2 cousins, boys of 12 and 14, ran to the creek with shouts of excitement. After the tension of the past weeks, their joy was infectious. They set to work immediately. Thomas knew they had to move fast. If army patrols came through, everything had to look legitimate. They needed to appear like a normal frontier family, not a white man harboring fugitive Apache. The first task was expanding the cabin. With help from Kimmy's cousins, who Thomas learned were named Hasun and Yuma, they built 2 additional rooms. One became Nalin's space where she could prepare medicines and sleep. The other was for the boys to share. As they worked, Thomas taught the boys English. They picked it up quickly, already knowing some from the camp. He also taught them frontier skills: how to use an axe properly, how to build sturdy walls, how to read a surveyor's marks. Kimmy and Nalin worked just as hard, establishing a garden using both Apache and settler methods. They planted corn in the traditional 3 Sisters method alongside beans and squash, but also added white man's crops like wheat and potatoes. Nalin gathered wild plants and began cultivating them near the house, creating her medicine garden. Within a month, the homestead was transformed. It looked like a working farm, productive and established. More importantly, it felt like a home. But Thomas knew appearances weren't enough. They needed legal protection. One morning, he rode to the nearest land office in a town called Silver Ridge. He brought his marriage certificate and his land deed. The clerk, a bored-looking man named Patterson, barely glanced up when Thomas entered. "What can I do for you?" "I need to register family members on my property," Thomas said, keeping his voice casual. "My wife's mother and cousins. They'll be living with us, helping work the land." That got Patterson's attention. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Your wife?" Thomas pulled out the marriage certificate. "Legally married by Reverend Walsh in Copper Creek." Patterson read the certificate slowly, his expression souring. "You married an Apache woman." "My wife is Apache, yes," Thomas said evenly. "And she's a U.S. citizen by marriage." "So are her family members I'm registering?" "That's legal under territorial law." It was a gray area of law, and both men knew it. The regulations about Apache and citizenship were complicated and often contradictory, but Thomas had studied what laws existed, and technically he was right. Patterson clearly didn't like it. "This is irregular, but legal," Thomas pressed. After a long, uncomfortable silence, Patterson pulled out the forms. "Fine. Names and ages." Thomas provided the information, spelling out each name carefully. When he finished, Patterson stamped the papers with obvious reluctance. "If there's trouble with these people, it's on you." "They're my family," Thomas said. "Of course it's on me." Riding home with the stamped papers in his saddlebag, Thomas felt relieved but not reassured. The law might technically be on his side, but laws out here were enforced by men, and men's prejudices often mattered more than words on paper. His fears were confirmed a week later when 3 men rode up to the homestead. They weren't army, but they wore deputy badges. The leader was a thick-necked man with mean eyes who introduced himself as Deputy Carson. "Heard you got some Indians living here," Carson said, not bothering with pleasantries. Thomas stood his ground on his own porch. "I have my wife, her mother, and her cousins, all legally registered on my property. That right?" Carson looked past Thomas toward where Kimmy was working in the garden. His gaze was insulting, assessing. Thomas felt his hands ball into fists. "I have the papers if you need to see them," Thomas said coldly. Carson spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Don't matter what papers you got. Apache belong on the reservation. There's talk you might be hiding hostiles. There's no hostiles here. Just my family working their own land. We'll be watching, Carson said. Any trouble, any at all, and we'll be back. And next time we might not be so friendly. After they rode away, Kimmy came to stand beside Thomas. This will be our life now, she said quietly. Always watched. Always suspect. I'm sorry, Thomas said. She shook her head. Don't be sorry. You gave us a chance at freedom. But we must be careful, very careful. Life settled into a routine, but it was never easy. Thomas continued his trading, but now he traveled farther afield, avoiding places where he knew hostility ran high. He traded with Mexican villages across the border and with a few sympathetic merchants who didn't care about his wife's heritage, Kimmy's. Healing skills became known despite their attempts to keep a low profile. When a settler's child fell ill with fever and the nearest doctor was 3 days away, the desperate father swallowed his pride and came to their door. Kimmy saved the child with an herbal remedy Nalin had taught her. Word spread. More people came, always at night, always quietly. Kimmy helped them all, never turning anyone away regardless of their earlier prejudice. Some paid with coins, others with goods. Some couldn't pay at all, and Kimmy helped them anyway. You're making a reputation, Thomas told her one evening. That could be dangerous. People need healing, Kimmy replied simply. I can't turn away from that, Thomas understood. It was one of the reasons he loved her. By late spring, Kimmy revealed wonderful news. She was pregnant. The joy on her face was matched by Nalin's excitement. They immediately began preparing, gathering special herbs, and making tiny clothes. Thomas felt overwhelmed with emotions he couldn't name. He was going to be a father. His child would be half Apache, half white, belonging fully to neither world. What kind of life could he give that child in a place like this? But looking at Kimmy's glowing face as she placed his hand on her still flat belly, he pushed the worry aside. They would figure it out. They had to. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer. Kimmy continued working, though Thomas and Nalin both tried to make her rest more. She ignored them, laughing at their concern. Apache women don't stop for pregnancy, she said. Baby comes when baby comes. They made secret trips to the San Carlos reservation to visit Dasan and Cochilo. The reservation was as bad as everyone had said, overcrowded and undersupplied, with corrupt agents stealing food meant for the Apache. But Dasan and his family were surviving, keeping their traditions alive in small, quiet ways. You made the right choice, Dasan told Thomas during one visit. Mother is healthier with you. Kimmy is happy, and soon you'll have a child. He smiled, some of his old hostility completely gone. I will be an uncle. The birth came on a warm April morning. Nalin and Kimmy had prepared everything, refusing to let Thomas help with the actual delivery. He paced outside like a nervous cat, while Kimmy's strong voice occasionally called out from inside. When he finally heard the baby's cry, thin and strong, his legs nearly gave out from relief. Nalin emerged with a smile. A girl, healthy and loud. Thomas went inside to find Kimmy exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. The baby had a shock of black hair and eyes that would probably be dark like her mother's. But her skin was lighter than Kimmy's, showing her mixed heritage. We'll call her Lily, Kimmy said, using the English name they'd chosen. Then she added the Apache name Nalin had given her. Lily Nalin. She carries both worlds in her name. Thomas held his daughter for the first time, feeling her tiny weight, and made a silent promise. He would give her a better world than the one they lived in now. Somehow, but the world had other plans. When Lily was 3 months old, Deputy Carson returned. This time he had a full posse with him, 6 hard-looking men with rifles. We got reports you've been hiding renegade Apache, Carson said. Harboring fugitives. That's a crime. I have no fugitives here, Thomas said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Just my registered family. We'll be the judge of that. Carson nodded to his men. Search the place. You have no warrant, Thomas protested. Don't need one for Indians, Carson sneered. The men tore through their home, throwing things around, destroying carefully organized medicines, ripping open storage. Kimmy stood with Lily pressed to her chest, her face carved from stone. Nalin held the boys back, though Hassan looked ready to fight. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But Carson wasn't satisfied. Those boys look like fighting age to me. Should be on the reservation. They're children, Thomas said, 12 and 14, and they're legally registered here. Law says different things depending on who's reading it, Carson replied. He studied the homestead with calculating eyes. You got a nice setup here. Shame if something happened to it, the threat was clear. 2 years passed. Lily grew into a curious toddler with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She babbled in a mix of English and Apache, not yet understanding that her two languages represented two worlds that often hated each other. In her innocence, she simply loved both. Thomas had expanded the homestead further. The boys, now 14 and 16, had grown strong and capable. Hasoon had a gift for working with horses while Yuma showed skill in carpentry. They'd built a proper barn, expanded the fields, and established the homestead as a productive enterprise. Life had found a rhythm, uneasy but functional. The harassment from Deputy Carson had decreased after Reverend Walsh publicly defended Thomas's family from the pulpit. The community remained divided, some accepting, some hostile, most simply indifferent as long as the Apache family caused no trouble. Then, in late 1879, everything changed. A runner came to their homestead at dawn. A young Apache man Thomas didn't recognize. He was breathing hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He spoke urgently in Apache to Nalin, who went pale. "What is it?" Thomas asked. Kuruk had ridden with the messenger. He dismounted heavily, his face grave. "There's been an incident at the San Carlos reservation. A group of young warriors tried to leave, said they were being starved. The army tried to stop them. There was shooting." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Dasan?" "He's alive," Kuruk said quickly. "But he was involved. The army is looking for everyone who was there. They're calling it a rebellion. They're rounding up families of anyone connected." Kimmy had come out, Lily on her hip. "My brother is in danger?" "Yes, and Cochilo's family. Anyone related to the men who left." Kuruk looked at Thomas. "They might come here." Looking for connections, Thomas's mind raced. They'd been careful to document their separation from the reservation, but blood ties were blood ties. If the army decided Nalin or Kimmy were conspiring with the so-called rebels, their legal protection might not matter. "What do we do?" Kimmy asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Before Thomas could answer, they saw dust on the horizon. "Riders coming fast. A lot of them, inside," Thomas ordered. "Everyone inside, now." They gathered in the main room. Thomas loaded his rifle, his hand steady from old soldier training. He positioned himself by the window where he could see out but had cover. Nalin pulled the boys back while Kimmy held Lily close, murmuring soothing words. The riders proved to be a full army patrol, maybe 20 soldiers led by a captain Thomas didn't recognize. They surrounded the homestead, rifles ready. This was different from Carson's harassment. This was official and dangerous. The captain dismounted and approached the porch. He was young for his rank, probably in his late 20s, with a hard face that had seen too much fighting. "Thomas Garrett?" Thomas stepped out, rifle lowered but ready. "That's me. I'm Captain Reynolds. We have reason to believe you're harboring fugitives from the San Carlos reservation." "I'm not harboring anyone. My family is legally registered here. You can check with the land office in Silver Ridge. Your wife's brother participated in an escape attempt that resulted in the deaths of 2 soldiers, Reynolds said flatly. "Her family is under suspicion of conspiracy." "My wife hasn't seen her brother in over a year," Thomas said. "We have nothing to do with what happened at the reservation." Reynolds studied him. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to follow the law," Thomas replied. "My family is legal. We're on private property. You have no cause to be here without a warrant." "Laws get flexible during a rebellion," Reynolds said. "I could arrest everyone here and sort it out later." Thomas felt sweat trickle down his back despite the cool morning air. He couldn't fight 20 soldiers, but he couldn't let them take his family either. Then Reverend Walsh's voice called out, "Captain Reynolds, is there a problem?" Thomas had never been so relieved to see anyone. Walsh rode up with 3 other men, including the rancher whose wife Nalin had saved and a merchant from Silver Ridge. They'd formed the loose alliance Thomas had built, and they'd clearly been watching for trouble. Reynolds looked annoyed. "This is army business, Reverend, and Mr. Garrett is a member of my congregation," Walsh said firmly. "A lawful citizen with legally registered family. If you have accusations, you should present them to the territorial court, not conduct a raid." The rancher, a man named Miller, spoke up. "Garrett's family has been here for 2 years. They're peaceful, productive citizens. They've helped half the families in this area with medical care. What exactly are you accusing them of? Reynolds' jaw tightened. He was clearly uncomfortable with this audience. Army actions on reservation lands went unchallenged. But this was different. These were white citizens defending another white citizen's property rights. His wife is sister to a rebel, Reynolds said. His wife is a married woman who hasn't been to the reservation in 2 years, Walsh countered. Unless you're suggesting we start arresting all family members of anyone who commits a crime, regardless of their involvement. Reynolds looked between his soldiers and the growing group of white citizens. Thomas could see him calculating. A fight here would be messy and not the kind of victory that looked good in reports. Fine, Reynolds finally said, but we'll be investigating. If we find any evidence of contact with the fugitives, I'll be back with more than words. You do that, Thomas said quietly, and you'll find nothing because there's nothing to find. After the soldiers left, Thomas's legs nearly gave out from relief. Walsh and the others stayed for a while, their presence a protection. But eventually they had to leave, and Thomas's family was alone again with their fear. That night, Kimi sat with Lily already asleep. We can't keep living like this, she said, echoing her words from 2 years ago. Every trouble at the reservation becomes our trouble. Every uprising makes us suspects. What choice do we have? Thomas asked. Nalin, who'd been quiet all evening, spoke up. We make ourselves more valuable than we are dangerous. We become people the community can't afford to lose. How? Thomas asked. Kimi's healing, Nalin said. It's already known, but quietly. We make it official. We open ourselves as healers for the whole territory. Not hiding, not secret midnight visits. Open and legitimate. That's risky, Thomas said. It means more attention. We already have attention, Kimi pointed out. Bad attention. Maybe good attention is better. Over the next months, they took Nalin's advice. Kimi began openly advertising her services as a healer, with Thomas helping translate and handle the business side. They treated everyone who came, regardless of their ability to pay or their previous attitude toward Apache people. It was a gamble, but it worked. Slowly, Kimi built a reputation that transcended prejudice. When children were sick, parents cared more about results than the healer's heritage. When settlers were injured far from doctors, Kimi's skills saved lives. The turning point came when Deputy Carson's own daughter fell desperately ill with an infection. The town doctor had given up. In desperation, Carson swallowed his pride and rode to Thomas's homestead. Please, he said, the word clearly painful. My girl is dying. Kimi didn't hesitate. She gathered her medicines and rode back with Carson, despite Thomas's protests. She spent 2 days at Carson's house, treating the girl with herbs and careful nursing. The daughter survived, and Carson, to his credit, publicly acknowledged that Kimi had saved her. I was wrong about you, he said gruffly when he came to pay. About your family. I still don't much like Indians, but I can't deny you helped my girl when nobody else could. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even full acceptance. But it was a grudging respect that meant Carson stopped actively harassing them. That alone improved their lives significantly. By 1881, their situation had stabilized. They weren't wealthy, but they were secure. The homestead was productive. Kimi's healing practice brought steady income. Hasoon and Yuma were skilled workers who contributed significantly. Lily was 3 years old, bright and healthy. They even received good news from the reservation. Dasan had been cleared of direct involvement in the escape attempt. He and his family were surviving, and relations between the band and the army had improved slightly with a new, more reasonable commander. Thomas allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a sustainable path. Then came the letter that changed everything. It was from the territorial government, official and formal. New regulations were being implemented regarding Apache living off reservation land. All Apache not on reservations needed to re-register and provide proof of citizenship status. The process was complicated, requiring travel to the territorial capital and multiple witness statements. Thomas read the letter 3 times, his heart sinking with each reading. The letter was bureaucratic language hiding a simple truth. They wanted to make it as difficult as possible for Apache to live freely. What does it say? Kimi asked, seeing his expression. Thomas explained, watching her face fall. The territorial capital was over 200 miles away. The trip would take weeks, and there was no guarantee they'd approve the registration even after all that effort. It's designed to force people back to the reservation, Nolan said quietly. Make the process so hard that people give up. We won't give up, Thomas said firmly. We'll go. We'll do whatever it takes. But the logistics were daunting. Someone had to stay and manage the homestead. 5 years had passed since that bureaucratic battle at the territorial capital. It was now 1886, and Thomas was 37 years old. His hair had started showing gray at the temples, and his face bore more lines from sun and worry. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw a man who'd found his place in the world. The homestead had grown into something remarkable. What started as a rough cabin and 100 acres had become a thriving small ranch. They'd added more rooms to the house, built a proper barn and workshop, expanded their fields, and even dug a well that provided reliable water year-round. Lily was now 8 years old, tall for her age with her mother's grace and her father's curiosity about everything. She could ride a horse as well as any child in the territory, spoke both English and Apache fluently, and had already begun learning healing arts from her grandmother and mother. She attended the small school that had opened in Silver Ridge, where she faced occasional taunts about her mixed heritage, but had also made genuine friends. More remarkably, she had 2 younger siblings now, a brother named Daniel who was 4 and already showing signs of being a handful, and the newest addition, baby Anna, just 6 months old and the delight of the entire household. Hassan and Yuma were now grown men, 20 and 18. Hassan had married an Apache woman from a neighboring homestead and built his own small house on Thomas's land. Yuma was courting a Mexican girl from across the border, much to everyone's amusement. Both young men had become invaluable to the homestead's success, but the most significant change was what the homestead had become to the wider community. Thomas and Kimmy's place had evolved into something unique, a bridge between worlds. Kimmy's reputation as a healer had grown far beyond their immediate area. People traveled from 50 miles away or more to seek her help. She'd developed treatments that combined Apache traditional medicine with techniques she'd learned from the few doctors who'd been willing to teach her. Her success rate was remarkable, and even the most prejudiced settlers had to acknowledge her skill. Thomas had become a different kind of bridge. His trading business had expanded, and he'd become a trusted middleman between Apache communities and white settlements. He spoke both languages, understood both cultures, and had a reputation for honest dealing. When tensions arose, people increasingly came to him to mediate. The homestead itself had become a gathering place. On any given day, you might find Apache families visiting from other homesteads or even the reservation, Mexican traders passing through, white settlers seeking Kimmy's medical help, and children of all backgrounds playing together in the yard, not yet understanding or caring about the divisions their parents worried over. Nalin, now in her 60s with completely gray hair, presided over it all with quiet dignity. She'd become a respected elder, not just to Apache but to the entire community. Her wisdom was sought on everything from when to plant crops to how to settle family disputes. One warm afternoon in late summer, Thomas sat on his porch watching Lily teach her younger brother how to braid leather, while Kimmy nursed baby Anna inside. Hassan and Yuma were working with horses in the corral, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Nalin sat nearby, weaving a basket with practiced hands. You look content, Nalin observed in her now fluent English. Thomas smiled. I am, more than I ever thought possible. You've built something good here, she said. When I offered you my daughter all those years ago, I saw something in you. A good heart. But even I didn't imagine this. She gestured at the bustling homestead, at the life they'd created. I couldn't have built any of this alone, Thomas said. It took all of us. A rider approached, and Thomas recognized Karuk, now a man in his 30s with a family of his own on the reservation. He visited regularly, maintaining ties between their 2 communities. Thomas, Kimmy, Karuk called out, dismounting. His face was excited. I bring news. The territorial governor is coming through this region next month. He wants to visit your homestead. Thomas felt both pride and apprehension. Why? You've been noticed, Karuk said. Word has spread about what you've built here. A successful mixed community. Peaceful relations between Apache and whites. The governor wants to see it for himself, maybe use it as an example. Kimi had come out carrying Anna. Is this good or dangerous? Could be both, Thomas admitted. High-level attention could legitimize what they'd built, but it could also paint a target on their backs from those who opposed any accommodation with Apache. Over the next weeks, they prepared. They cleaned and organized, though Thomas insisted they shouldn't try to hide who they were. "If he's coming to see us, he should see the truth," Thomas said. The governor arrived with a small entourage on a crisp September morning. Governor Thompson was a pragmatic man in his 50s, less interested in ideology than in what worked. He toured the homestead, asked questions, and watched how the mixed household functioned. At dinner that evening, with Kimmy's excellent cooking and the whole family present, the governor spoke candidly. "I won't pretend most of the territory is like this. There's still too much hatred on both sides, but what you've built here proves it doesn't have to be that way. People can live together, work together if they're willing to try." "It hasn't been easy," Thomas said honestly. "We've faced harassment, threats, bureaucratic obstacles. We've had to fight for every bit of legitimacy." "I know," Thompson said. "I've read the reports. Deputy Carson's complaints, the registration challenges, the Army investigations." He paused. "But you persevered, and now you have something worth protecting." Before he left, the governor made a promise. "I can't change everyone's hearts, but I can make policy. I'm going to issue a directive that homesteads like yours, legally registered and productive, are to be left alone by territorial authorities. No more harassment without cause. It won't stop private prejudice, but it should stop official interference." After the governor left, the family celebrated quietly. It felt like a turning point, official recognition and protection they'd never had before. Life continued to evolve. Lily grew into a bright young woman who dreamed of becoming a teacher. Daniel showed talent with horses like Hassan. Anna was too young to show her path yet, but she was healthy and loved. Thomas and Kimmy's marriage had deepened with time. They'd weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. They'd learned each other's languages and customs. They'd raised children who belonged to both worlds and neither. And they'd built something that mattered. One evening, nearly 10 years after they'd first met, Thomas and Kimmy sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The sounds of their family, children playing, Nalan singing an old Apache song, Hassan and Yuma arguing good-naturedly about something, filled the air around them. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Choosing this life? Leaving your people?" Kimmy looked at him with those dark eyes that still made his heart skip. "I didn't leave my people. I brought them with me. And I gained new people too." She gestured at their mixed community. "These are my people now. All of them." "It's not what either of us expected," Thomas said. "No," Kimmy agreed. "It's better. Harder, but better." Thomas thought back to that day in the canyon, hearing a woman scream and making the split-second decision to help. That moment had seemed so simple at the time. Right versus wrong, justice versus cruelty. He'd had no idea how that one choice would ripple forward, changing everything. He'd saved Nalan's life, and in return she'd offered him her daughter. But it wasn't really payment or debt. It was an invitation to become part of something larger than himself. To build bridges instead of walls, to create family where there was none. "What are you thinking?" Kimmy asked, leaning against him. "That I'm grateful," Thomas said simply. "For that day in the canyon, for your mother's offer, for your choice to give us a chance. For all of this," Kimmy smiled. "You know what I've learned? Fate and choice aren't opposites. Fate brought you to that canyon, but we both chose what happened next. Every day we choose, and I choose you," Thomas said. "Every day." "And I choose you," Kimmy replied. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting and stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Around them, their home buzzed with life. Apache and white, mixed and blended, old traditions and new ways all coexisting in this small valley they'd carved out of a hostile world. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still prejudice, still dangers. The world beyond their homestead was often cruel to people like them. But here, in this place they'd built together, love was stronger than hate. Family was stronger than fear. Nalan had called it a life debt. Kimmy had called it fate and choice combined. Thomas thought of it simply as the best thing that ever happened to him. That day in the canyon, he'd saved a woman from outlaws. He couldn't have known he was really saving himself, pulling himself out of a lonely half-life into something real and rich and meaningful. He'd been offered a bride as payment for a debt. But what he'd really received was so much more. A partner, a family, a community, a purpose, a home. As night fully descended and Kimmy called everyone inside for dinner, Thomas took one last look at the land stretching out before him. This valley, this homestead, this life they'd built against all odds. 10 years ago, he'd been a solitary man riding through canyons with nothing. Summer came to the Arizona territory with blazing heat that made the air shimmer and dance. Thomas found himself riding back to the Apache camp every 2 weeks, just as he'd promised. Each time, his saddlebags were loaded with trade goods, coffee, steel needles, cloth, and small tools. He always received fair trade in return: beautifully tanned hides, herbs, and crafted items that he could sell in the settlements. But everyone knew trading wasn't the real reason he kept coming back. The first few visits were awkward. Thomas and Kimmy would sit near her family's fire with Kuruk translating every word, while Nalan and at least one other family member watched like hawks. They talked about simple things at first: the weather, the plants growing along the stream, the rabbits Kimmy had seen that morning. It was stilted and formal, but something was growing there. By the fourth visit, Kimmy had learned enough English phrases to stumble through short conversations without Kuruk's help. Her accent was thick, and sometimes she'd get frustrated trying to find the right words, but Thomas found her determination charming. She'd furrow her brow in concentration, wave her hands to act out what she meant, and occasionally burst into Apache when English failed her completely. Thomas learned Apache words too, though he struggled more than Kimmy did with English. Apache had sounds his mouth wasn't used to making, and the grammar worked differently than any language he'd encountered. But Kimmy was patient with him, correcting gently and praising even his smallest successes. "You say it better now," she told him one afternoon in her careful English, after he'd managed to ask about her day without mangling the words too badly. "You learn quick." "You're a good teacher," Thomas replied. She smiled at that, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Thomas felt something warm spread through his chest. As the weeks passed, they were allowed to walk together along the stream, though always with Kimmy's cousin trailing behind at a respectful distance. Thomas learned that Kimmy had been promised to a warrior from another band 3 years ago, but he'd been killed in a raid by Mexican soldiers before they could marry. "He was brave," Kimmy said quietly, watching the water flow past. "But I didn't know him well. My parents chose and I agreed because it was my duty." "Do you miss him?" Thomas asked carefully. Kimmy considered the question. "I miss what could have been. A family, children. But I didn't miss him as a person. I didn't really know him." She looked at Thomas. "That's why I wanted to choose this time. To know the man first. And?" Thomas's heart was in his throat. "Are you learning to know me?" "Yes," she said simply. "And I like what I learn." Thomas learned about her too. Kimmy had trained as a medicine woman since she was a girl, learning from Nalan. She knew every plant in these mountains, which ones healed and which ones could kill. She could set broken bones and treat snake bites and deliver babies. Her knowledge was vast and detailed, passed down through generations. "In your world, do women learn medicine?" she asked him once. "Some do," Thomas said, "but it's harder for them. Men don't always respect women doctors." Kimmy frowned. "That's foolish. Women are often better at healing. We understand pain differently." Thomas was learning that Kimmy had strong opinions about many things. She believed women should have more say in tribal decisions. She thought fighting the soldiers was sometimes necessary, but often stupid when negotiation could work instead. She loved her people but saw their flaws clearly. "My brother Dasan thinks I talk too much," she admitted with a slight smile. "He says I should be more quiet and obedient." "I like that you speak your mind," Thomas said. "Some men are afraid of strong women. I'm not one of them." Kimmy looked at him with something like wonder. "In your world are many men like you?" Thomas laughed. "Not as many as there should be." By midsummer, Thomas realized he was falling in love. Real love. Not just the fascination of someone exotic or the physical attraction he certainly felt. He loved how Kimmy's mind worked, quick and clever. He loved her laugh, which she tried to hide behind her hand but couldn't quite manage. He loved how gentle she was with children and how fierce she became when defending someone she cared about. One evening, sitting by the stream while the sun set in spectacular shades of orange and red, Kimmy asked him about his past. "You fought in the war. You told Kuruk this. Did you kill men?" Thomas had known this question would come eventually. "Yes," he said quietly. "Many men. Too many. Does it haunt you?" "Every night." He looked at his hands. I tell myself I did what I had to do, that it was war and men on both sides were just following orders. But I still see their faces sometimes. Kimmy was quiet for a moment. Then she took his hand, the first time she'd touched him beyond formal greetings. Her fingers were small and calloused from work, but warm. The weight of death is heavy, she said softly. But you carry it honestly. That matters. Thomas looked at her, this woman who understood more than she should about darkness and grief. Have you ever had to kill? Once, she said. A man attacked my mother when I was 15. I had a knife. I used it. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held old pain. It was him or her. I chose her, but I remember his eyes when he died. They sat in silence, hands joined, watching the sun disappear. Two people from different worlds, both carrying weight they couldn't put down, but somehow the weight felt lighter when shared. As harvest season approached, Thomas noticed changes in the camp. There was tension in the air, worried conversations that stopped when he came near. Warriors checked their weapons more often. Scouts went out and came back with grim faces. Finally, Kuruk explained, "The army is moving more patrols into the territory. They're looking for Apache bands trying to force everyone onto reservations. We've stayed hidden so far, but it's getting harder." Thomas had heard the same rumors in the settlements. The government wanted all Apache on the San Carlos reservation, a place with bad water and worse land. Many bands had already been forced there. Those who resisted were hunted down. "What will your people do?" Thomas asked. Kuruk shrugged, but Thomas could see the worry in his eyes. "We'll stay free as long as we can, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The situation cast a shadow over Thomas's growing happiness. He and Kimi were falling in love, yes, but what future could they have? If her band was forced onto the reservation, would she be allowed to leave with him? Would she even want to? He asked her one evening as directly as he dared. "Kimi, if things get dangerous here, if your people have to move to the reservation, what happens to us?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," she finally said. "My heart wants one thing. My duty to my people might demand another. Could you leave them? Come live in the white world with me? Could you come live on a reservation with me?" She countered. The question hit hard because Thomas knew the answer. The reservations were terrible places, and white men married to Apache women were treated as traitors by both sides. "It would be a miserable existence. I have some land," Thomas said slowly. "A homestead claim about 50 miles from here. It's not much, just a cabin and some acreage. But it's outside reservation boundaries. Maybe your family could claim to be my relatives. Maybe they could stay there protected." Kimi looked at him with surprise. "You would do this? Risk trouble with your government?" "For you?" Thomas said. "Yes." She touched his face, a gesture so gentle it made his throat tight. "You have a good heart, Thomas. But I think it's not so simple." She was right. Nothing about this was simple. The harvest season arrived, painting the mountains in gold and red. The Apache held ceremonies of thanksgiving, dancing and singing through the night. Thomas was invited to participate, an honor that he understood the weight of. He danced awkwardly at first, feeling self-conscious. But Kimi pulled him into the circle with a laugh, and suddenly it didn't matter if he looked foolish. After the ceremony, Nalin approached Thomas with Kuruk translating. "The season we agreed upon has passed," she said formally. "My daughter must now choose. Will she take you as husband, or will you part as friends?" Thomas's heart hammered. This was it. The moment everything changed one way or another. Nalin turned to Kimi and asked her directly in Apache. The whole camp seemed to hold its breath. Kimi looked at Thomas, and in her eyes he saw everything. Love, yes, but also fear and hope and determination. She spoke clearly in English, wanting him to understand without translation. "I choose Thomas. I want to be his wife." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of the world. Around them, some people smiled. Others looked worried. Dasan scowled, but didn't object. Thomas stepped forward and took Kimi's hands. "And I choose you." "With all my heart," Nalin smiled, satisfied. Cochillo nodded grudgingly. Even Delgado, watching from nearby, seemed pleased. "Then it's decided," Kuruk said with a wide grin. "We'll prepare the ceremony. By the next full moon, you'll be married in the Apache way." As the camp erupted in celebration, Thomas pulled Kimi aside. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "It's not too late to change your mind." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I've watched you for months. I know who you are. You're kind but strong, gentle but brave. You see me as equal, not less. You respect my people even when it's hard." She smiled. "And you make my heart feel light. You make mine feel full," Thomas said softly. They stood close, not quite touching, but wanting to. Around them,